Hello everyone, my name is Scarlette-Electra and I'm going to be presenting my paper Scattered Deaths and Hidden Limbs, which explores dissected mermaids and dismembered sailors in poetry and popular culture from 1794 to 1845. This paper focuses on the dismemberment of sailors within women's mermaid poetry of the period, contrasted with the physical and metaphorical dismemberment and dissection that mermaids faced within the contemporary press. Mermaid specimens were often physically dissected in order to prove or disprove their veracity. They were then revealed to be artificial chimeras, often crudely constructed from monkeys and fish. These discourses found their home in the popular press of the period. The popularity of such articles is attested to by a journalist in 1899 printing, "What would we do without old friends like the sea serpent and the mermaid?" Newspapers also published accounts of mermaid sightings, in which the intricacies of the mermaid's humanoid and fish features were always detailed to a minute extent. However, in the mermaid poetry of Anne Radcliffe, Anne Bannerman, Jessie Stewart, and Maria Jane Dewsbury, this is reversed. Instead, in this selection of poems, it is the mermaids who witness or participate in the brutal dissection of men, a reduction into their composite parts of stiffened limbs, curdled lifeblood, torn vessels, and hoary heads. Firstly, I want to explore the presence of mermaids in the late 18th and 19th century popular press. As I've already suggested, this can be largely split into two categories: accounts of mermaid sightings and descriptions and dissections of mermaid specimens. I want to begin by examining two of the most famous accounts of mermaid sightings from the period, collectively referred to as the Ray Mermaids. These sightings are from 1798 and 1809. For a more thorough reading of these sources in context, I recommend Simon Young's 2018 article, The Ray Mermaids in the Bay and in the Press, as I will be focusing specifically on the language used to describe the mermaids in each description. The first account reads as such, and came from a local school teacher, William Munro. The head was covered with hair, shaded on the crown, the forehead round, the face plump, the cheeks ruddy, the eyes blue, the mouth and lips of a natural form resembling those of a man, the teeth I could not discover as the mouth was shut, the breasts and abdomen, the arms and fingers of the size of a full-grown body of the human species. The fingers, from the action in which the hands were employed, did not appear to be webbed, but as to this I am not positive. Something which immediately strikes me from this account is the attention paid to describing the mermaid's appearance in a deconstructed way, piece by piece. This associates the account with the blazon technique. It catalogues the physical attributes of the female subject, but more importantly, it breaks the mermaid down into composite parts: hair, cheeks, eyes, etc. It is also significant that these parts reveal the mermaid to be conventionally attractive in appearance, blue-eyed and of a natural form. This division of features is also observable in the second, 1809 account of a mermaid from the area, reported by two young women. The face seemed plump and round, the eyes and nose were small, the former were of a light grey colour, and the mouth was large, and from the shape of the jawbone, which seemed straight, the face looked short. As to the inside of the mouth I can say nothing, not having attended to it, though sometimes open. The forehead, nose, and chin were white. The head was exceedingly round, the hair thick and long, of a green oily cast. Leigh Hunt's 1836 article, The Sirens and Mermaids of the Poets, emphasises that both accounts attempt to humanise the mermaid. He writes that extraordinary particulars were given of the human aspect of the vision. Munro specifies that had not the rock on which it was sitting been dangerous for bathing, I would have been constrained to have regarded it as really a human form. It is not just through appearance that the mermaid is rendered human, and therefore less of a threat to the definable world on land. The girl's account also specifies its annoyance at its hair being upset by the waves, and its attempts to wave away a bird hovering around it. The impulse to bring the mermaid into understandable, known waters again rears its head here. The girls interpret the mermaid's behaviour in relation to their own concerns, rather than accepting that the behaviour observed could perhaps not translate to human desires. As Christina Bachilega and Marie Brown write in the introduction to the Penguin Book of Mermaids, we humans do not deal well with betwixt and between. Liminality makes us anxious. We prefer our world organised into well-ordered and sharply defined categories, and we prefer to be in charge of it. The other significant presence of mermaids in the press arose from the discussion around preserved mermaid specimens. Faced with a world which increasingly appeared to be fully explored, thanks to the expansion of the British Empire, it is unsurprising that attention turned to the fathomlessness of the sea and what creatures may lurk within its waters. Fueled by the biological and taxonomical advancements of the era, frequent polemical articles were published debating whether or not mermaids were real. For a good overview of mermaid history in popular culture across this period, I recommend Jan Bondenson's The Fiji Mermaid and Other Essays in Natural and Unnatural History. Many contributed to the literal and metaphorical deconstruction of these specimens, as can be seen in Bondenson's book, but I want to draw attention to the gendered element of the disproving process. Merpeople were, more often than not, female. Dr. Rhys Price, writing in an 1822 edition of the Gentleman's Magazine, clearly establishes the gendered gaze of these dissectors, writing that the scapula and arms, hands, thumbs, fingers, and nails furnish us with an exact representation of those of a delicate female, and that the breastbone, clavicles, and ribs of the chest are perfectly distinct, and the breasts, which are now of some size and appear to have been very large, and nipples are of an admirable model of those in the human species. A response to Price's article, which appears in the Gentleman's Magazine later in the same year, reads as thoroughly disappointed. After going to view the same mermaid, J. Murray writes that it is the very personification of ugliness, and that it appears to him most strange that Dr. Price should have sanctioned the belief of its being a natural production. Jimmy Packham and David Punther's 2017 article, Oceanic Studies in the Gothic Deep, when analysing Tennyson's The Kraken, notes that Tennyson provides a detailed description of the Kraken's marine environment, encompassing him on all sides, without ever quite reaching the titular creature. However, in the popular press, the main focus seemed to be to make the ungraspable and uncanny as comprehensible as possible, even domestic, which may explain the close attention given to the mermaid's appearance. Even when discussing mermaids seriously, as in Price's article, the division of the mermaid's body into known parts allows it to lose some of its uncanniness. Price writes that immediately under the breast the fishy form commences. It then terminated in the tail of a fish not unlike a salmon, which certainly leads to it decreasing in intrigue. While the press remained preoccupied with the appearance of mermaids, this is notably absent within the poems I am going to discuss. These poems are Anne Radcliffe's The Sea Nymph, Anne Bannerman's The Mermaid, Jessie Stewart's The Sea Nymph, and Maria Jane Dewsbury's The Sunken Rock. Despite each poem approaching the subject of the mermaid in a different way, these poems have two key things in common. Firstly, they do not address the appearance of the mermaid. Their primary focuses seem to be what she can do rather than what she looks like. Secondly, each poem repeatedly intertwines the figure of the mermaid with the drowned and dismembered sailor. Though the relationship between these figures varies, invariably the mermaid is dominant over her mortal companion. This gestures towards an inversion of mermaids' presence in the press, where, as we have seen, they were frequently metaphorically and physically dissected. Through this role reversal, these female poets combat the objectification that mermaids faced in other areas of contemporary culture. Radcliffe's The Sea Nymph is the earliest and least violent of the poems that I am going to consider. This poem is an embedded narrative composed in story by Emily in The Mysteries of Udolpho. As Radcliffe also shares the indulgent imaginings from which Emily's poem originates, we are given insight into the difference between the original poem Emily intended to write and her final piece. In Emily's original narrative, any animosity, violence, or the possibility of an obstacle which the sea nymph cannot conquer is absent, while all are established in the actual poem. While Radcliffe's mermaid is virtuous and devoted to aiding sailors at risk of drowning, by emphasising the power of her mermaid's voice, Radcliffe associates her creation with the classical siren. Marina Warner's From the Beast to the Blonde on Fairy Tales and Their Tellers suggests that while it is not possible to pinpoint the moment or the place when and where the fish-tailed mermaid became conflated with the bird-bodied siren of Greek myth, this fusion is one facilitated by both creatures' command of voice. By turning to the classical sirens to craft her poem, Radcliffe has no choice but to let some darkness invade Emily's fanciful images. In the Odyssey, the sirens sing a song that offers such tempting knowledge that those who hear it never leave and eventually die. Emily's original reverie is antithetical to this, as she soothes the sorrows of a pensive wanderer with her music, and then offers him the delicious fruit that hangs round Neptune's palace. This changes within the poem itself, as while Emily's sea nymph still hushes the sailor's fearful groan, she now has an opponent. Neptune is reimagined as a tyrant, who restrains and punishes her for saving sailors until the drowning seamen cry in vain. Radcliffe cannot ignore her sea nymph's involuntary inheritance of association with violence, so instead rewrites the role that she plays in this destruction. It is Neptune, a man, who becomes the threat. However, the mermaid's overall influence and power within the poem still makes up its main narrative. Even the men's ship, traditionally a symbol of the masculine urge to explore and conquer, labours slow, with sail and topmast bending low, showing their impotence in the oceanic territory of the mermaid. It is she who must guide the bark to peaceful shore. A final representation of masculine weakness comes through the partial synecdoche of the sea nymph soothing the shipwrecked sailor's heart. Having lost his ship unsteadies the man's identity as a sailor, and he is then anatomically reduced further to only a heart. This image of soothing creates an image of the mermaid as a physical and emotional healer, vital due to the physical and emotional fragility of the sailor's heart. This stanza, being a precursor to the one in which the seamen do drown, grants this reduction a further tint of violence, as without the sea nymph there would be no still beating heart to soothe. While this gesture towards dismemberment is not as dramatic as some of the other romantic women's representations, it does give the opportunity, as we will see, for further elaboration on the topic. By contrast, in Bannerman's poem, the mermaid is explicitly responsible for the disseverance of men's bodies and ships. The poem begins with her unhinged order that death-fraught whirlwinds should blow on and cause havoc to the sailors' ships caught within them. Leading the scene of destruction she is encouraged, the mermaid then describes the dismemberment of the sailors which takes place as a result of their ship's annihilation. Across a single stanza, Bannerman moves from focusing on the microcosmic individual damage that has occurred, such as the cheek of each sailor turning pale, before escalating to describe how the entire boat has been ripped open to reveal shelving graves. It is through this stanza that Bannerman disguises the extreme level of violence that has occurred, by deploying both synecdoche and homonyms to simultaneously represent the ship sinking and the men drowning. The image of the torn vessel drinking the surging waves falls in between physical description related to the men and that related to their ship. Through this, Bannerman grants herself a sort of plausible deniability that she did not intend to conjure graphic images of torn, dismembered sailors, unable to stop themselves from drinking the inescapably surging waves. A similar abstraction of violence occurs in the following stanza, where even the moon is in blood. Here, the deaths of the rest of the crew are detailed, as the low sounds across the waters die, replaced with shrieks of anguish. The death brought by the water waves is translated into sound waves, a death which comes in degrees. First the low sounds die, but even these are followed by still more shrieks. In a scene otherwise populated with watery imagery, the stanza's penultimate line, detailing the convulsive division process taking place via the solid rocks, feels an aggressive interruption, mimetic of the cutting process that the line describes. By drawing our attention to these rocks, prior to informing us that over the heaving surge the embodied spirits glide, Bannerman creates an image of recurring collision and subsequent amputation, simply by alluding to the rhythmic patterns of the waves. A final example of this disseverance comes from the mermaid's summary of her role as to scatter death. Adriana Crushian's reading of the poem interprets scatter as expressing the mermaid's indiscriminate willingness to sweep away the innocent and the guilty alike. However, it could also allude to the dismemberment of the sailors, a death which literally results in scattering or spreading. While Jessie Stewart's The Sea Nymph and Maria Jane Dewsbury's The Sunken Rock also provide us with more virtuous mermaids, the violence invoked by Bannerman continues to permeate their narratives. While the intent to save sailors may exist, neither type of mermaid is ultimately successful. Stuart's sea nymph may combat heaven's unyielding storm, but eventually acquiesces to hushing the luckless wanderers of the sea in everlasting sleep, thinly veiling the practice of mercy-killing. Additionally, Dewsbury's Oceanides are described as milder ocean's daughters than sirens, who also appear in the poem. If they could, the Oceanides would save, but they are weak against the conquering roar of their sisters. Despite these intentions, curiously, Stuart and Dewsbury's mermaids make little effort to save the sailors from drowning, and only act when they are forced to confront the consequences of their inaction, because the bodies are literally on their doorsteps. Thomas Keathley, in his seminal The Fairy Mythology, draws attention to the belief that people that are drowned and whose bodies are not found are taken into the dwellings of the mermaids, an image which is embedded into each of these poems. Dewsbury's Oceanides weep because the sound of human woe has infiltrated their caverned halls, as if they have been infected by human emotion. Similarly, it is only when their lifeblood over the ocean swims and curdles round my central cave that Stuart's sea nymph is driven to hide the victim's stiffened limbs in the darkness of the oozy wave. Alongside an explicit reference to dismemberment through the victim's disembodied limbs, more ambiguous descriptions of disseverance can also be observed. Though only one individual victim is mentioned, a sense of greater destruction is created by the quantity of blood in Stuart's poem. It curdles, forms an oozy wave of darkness, and swims over the entire ocean, elaborating on the image of the scattered death Bannerman described. The whole ocean appears prone to pollution and corruption by blood. While the intricate burial rituals performed by these mermaids seem more in line with conventionally feminine human roles, there is an explicitness to these poems that continues to associate them with the Gothic. A general sense of futility exists within the mermaids' attempts to purify and protect the bodies from further decay. Even as the Oceanides engage in the bejeweling of the drowned humans' graves, we're reminded of the sailors' violent deaths. They bind sea blooms round beauty's locks, sadly floating on our rocks, and remove a hoary head from its lacerating bed onto soft seaweeds instead. The additional threat of grave desecration is also alluded to, as the Oceanides can only hide a while the limbs of youth from some monster's ravening tooth. Even after death and dismemberment, further degradation is still possible. This can perhaps be tied back to the scenes of dissection detailed in the press, where death did not prevent the intimate details of mermaids' bodies from being the subject of discussion. Although Stuart and Dewsbury's mermaids are not deliberately dismembering the sailors, across all of these poems, each poet's verb choices cement the mermaids' power over the sailors. The sailors are strictly inanimate subjects, while the mermaids serve as active witnesses to, or deliverers of, their barbaric fates. The human mermaid hierarchy established by the press holds no influence, neither does the expected male-female gender dynamic. In the boundaryless, uncharted territory of the ocean, within poetry at least, it is men who find themselves under almost microscopic levels of examination and observation. Thank you very much for watching.